an introduction, inshallah. طيب. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Inshallah, this is the first reading. Inshallah, there'll be a reading very quickly in the manzuma, the poem known as al-Laamiyah. Al-Laamiyah, that is attributed to Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. Laamiyatu, or it's also known as Aqidah Ibn Taymiyyah. And the reason why we say attributed to Ibn Taymiyyah is because there is disagreement. Did Ibn Taymiyyah write this poem or not? There is nothing that firmly establishes for us that Ibn Taymiyyah wrote this poem. There is nothing that firmly establishes for us that Ibn Taymiyyah wrote this poem, but there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. From them is that this poem was found amongst other works of Ibn Taymiyyah's. Other things that Ibn Taymiyyah wrote, this poem was inside of that. Secondly, it seems to match some of Ibn Taymiyyah's style. All of us have a style in the way that we write, the way that we speak, and some of these things match Ibn Taymiyyah's style. Thirdly, Ibn Taymiyyah has mentioned some of the lines of these poems in various places. قُبْحًا لِمَنْ نَبَذَ الْكِتَابَ وَرَاءَهُ وَإِذَا اسْتَدَلَّ يَقُولُ قَالَ الْأَخْطَلُ. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions that in Majmu' al-Fatawa. He says that a poet once said about these people, and then he mentioned that line. And it's often that when a person wants to mention some poetry to themselves, they hide themselves. So instead of telling you what poet said it, they said a poet said, to kind of downplay themselves. So these are things that make us think that it might be written by Ibn Taymiyyah. And from the scholars of those who have said it directly, that this is Ibn Taymiyyah's work. While there are other scholars who say no, it's less likely that this is by Ibn Taymiyyah. And they say that this is because none of his students mentioned it. None of his students mentioned it. And there's nothing that makes us think. Even Ibn Taymiyyah's great nephew, who mentioned this poem, doesn't attribute it to his grandfather, right? And so, or his grand uncle. So you say that this shows us that it's not written by him. Does that matter? No. Does not matter who wrote this poem, because the poem is true and accurate. The things in this poem are valid. It's called Laamiyah because the last word of every line ends in a lam. And like this, they entitle their poems, right? Al-Ra'iyah, al-Laamiyah, al-Nuniyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, or al-Qahtani, al-Mimiyah. And it's not far-fetched that it would be a book of Ibn Taymiyyah's, because Ibn Taymiyyah was an accomplished poet. Especially in affairs of religion, Ibn Taymiyyah was an accomplished poet. He has written many books in poetry. And from them is one, Ibn Taymiyyah, what they talk about from him is that he was a sign. He was an ayah, he was a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Taymiyyah was a miracle. How is this? Because he was given two qualities when so many people are given one. He had the ability to speak, and he had the ability to write. And he would do both, especially the quality of writing, in a very limited amount of time. So how many of his books were written between Dhuhr and Asr, or Maghrib and Isha, or Asr and Maghrib, right? And not only would he write a whole book in that time period that we still study today, like Wasitiyya, Tadmuriyya, Al-Hamawiyya, and things like this. There's a story about an individual who brought a poem to one of the Christians, challenging the Muslims in al-Qadr. Ya ulama ad-dini dhammiyu dinikum, right? O scholars of religion, I am dhimmi under your religion, right? And he asked this question about al-Qadr. It's about 8 lines of poetry where he's challenging the Muslims in predestination. So they brought this letter to Ibn Taymiyyah, and he's sitting with his students. And he began to look over it and started writing. And so his students just thought that he was writing out like just a response to it. And then, all of a sudden, while being finished, it turns out that it's poetry on the same scale of the poem that he just read, full of evidence, ayat, hadith, refuting the person that he wrote on the spot in that sitting. So Ibn Taymiyyah was an ayah, right? Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says about Ibn Taymiyyah that it's like the evidences used to fight which one is going to get to come out of his mouth first, right? It's as if Allah gathered up the evidences and put them in front of him, and he could pick from them which one he wanted. So this is no surprise that a book of this quality, in spite of its brevity, would be by Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. And Ibn Taymiyyah, as you all know, is Abu al-Abbas Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdul Salam al-Harrani ثم الدمشقي المعروف بابن تيمية رحمه الله تعالى. Abu al-Abbas, even though he did not have any children, he had a kunya, Abu al-Abbas. He also had a nickname, Taqiyuddin, right? The taqwa of the religion, or the pious person of this religion. But he was well known as Sheikh al-Islam, the scholar in Islam. Abu al-Abbas Taqiyuddin Abu al-Abbas Taqiyuddin Ahmed. That was his name, Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdul Salam ibn Taymiyyah. His father, Abdul Salam, was a scholar and had a seat and was in charge of a place known as Dar al-Hadith al-Sukriya in Damascus, and was a well-known scholar. And his grandfather, Majduddin Abu al-Barakat ibn Taymiyyah, Abdul Salam, was the leader of the Hanbali madhab of his time. Him and Ibn Qudama. They were the leaders of the Hanbali madhab of their time. Majduddin wrote the book known as al-Muharrar fil fiqh. Likewise, he is the author of al-Mujtaba, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the explanation, Nail al-Awtar, is an explanation of his book. And so his father, Majduddin Abu al-Barakat, grandfather Majduddin Abu al-Barakat, was also a major scholar, and so was the rest of the family, males and females. They came from a well-known scholarly family. His brothers, his uncles, Fakhruddin ibn Taymiyyah has correspondences with Ibn Qudama. And they say about his father, Abdul Halim, Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdul Salam, they say about his father, he was the star in between the sun and the moon. Right? His father was a star, but he was in between the sun and the moon. So his grandfather was the moon, and his son was the sun. And so like this, the father got overshadowed. But if not, the whole family, even his brother and his nephews, they were scholars in Islam. He was born in the year 661 after the Hijrah. 661 after the Hijrah. In Harran. And Harran is in modern day southwest Turkey, if I'm not mistaken, right? Closer to the Syrian border area.
He was Turkish?
Yes. Well, was he Turkish or Arab or Kurdish? They disagree. Right? The popular opinion is that he was an Arab. But you find others saying that he was Kurdish.
The Kurdish say that?
The Kurdish might say he's Kurdish, right? You let an American get up there and say, well, he's actually American, just before America was America. But in any circumstance, Ibn Taymiyyah was born in Harran, which is in Turkey. And at 667 or 669, they were forced to flee to Damascus because of the Mongolian onslaught. So they ran to Damascus with their family, where they became immediately established figures in Damascus. As we mentioned, his father was given leadership of one of the graduate universities there. And when his father died in 682, Ibn Taymiyyah took over. And so they say he got his first teaching job at 17, right? His first teaching job at 17, but the first president of a university, if you will, right? The head of the whole institute was at 22. right? So they used to say he was a ujuba. He was a major sign. Like he would read something, memorize it, right? And he got allowed to give fatwa at a young age. And from the qualities that made Ibn Taymiyyah excel, and this is something that we mentioned it because of how we can benefit from it, and Abdul Karim, if I'm not mistaken, is going to mention it as well, is that he was proficient in the Quran. The Quran is the source of all knowledge. And the better you are with the Quran, the greater you're going to be at everything. Two qualities that Ibn Taymiyyah, when you think about him, you don't necessarily think about them. But these are the qualities that made him who he was. His depth and understanding of the Quran and his abundance of dhikr. His knowledge and his action. And these things are his theme throughout life. Knowledge along with action. Right? Knowledge along with action. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala is well known. There are full books this thick just about his biography. Right? People have written volumes just about his biography, just his catalog, what books he wrote. There are volumes about that. So we're not going to spend too much time in it. Plus the author is probably going to go into it as well. He died in the year 728 after Hijrah, incarcerated because of a stance he took about the visiting of the Prophet's grave, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Him and his student Ibn Qayyim were incarcerated separately, and in that incarceration is when he died, rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah, in the year 728 after the Hijrah. Now, so what we'll do is we'll read this book. But before we read the book, let's read the poem. Right? Do they have the poem separate here? Yeah. We'll read the poem just to hear it, translate it, and then we'll just try. The poem is short. Everybody has explained this poem. Everybody has explained this poem, right? Almost any sheikh or any talib ilm, you'll find them with the sharh of this poem, right? Even classically, al-Mardawi, rahimahullah, like from the year 1200, he explained this poem, right? So there's an abundance of explanations, some of them only being an hour-long explanation, some of them being 5 hours long, some of them being 30 pages, some of them being 250 pages, right? So the poem, it doesn't require an abundance of explanation, except based on how much depth you want to get into about some of the topics mentioned. But the topics, he doesn't cover the entirety of Aqidah. He talks about the minhaj in Aqidah, which is the best part of the poem, and then he gives some specific examples about Aqidah. So he talks about the minhaj, how do we approach our Aqidah, which is the best part of the poem, and then he talks about some of the examples of our Aqidah. And then he closes it off with referencing where this Aqidah is benefited from, or where do you get this Aqidah from, and the one who has it as well as the one who doesn't. But the majority of this poem is about the minhaj and the approach to Aqidah. And so the author, he says, and then there's an issue here. Do you start off poetry with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim or not? Right? Some of them say you don't start off poetry with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And others say, yes, you can. Here they have it written, so we'll read it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي رزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل. One thing I forgot to mention, and this might not have a benefit, but there are several scales of Arabic poetry. They call them Bahr, the ocean of this or that. This scale is in the Bahr known as Kamil. It's a complete Bahr. Right, the scale is a lot longer than something like ridges, right? أبدأ بالحمد مصليا على محمد خير نبي أرسل وبعد. Right, that is ridges. It's real short. Boom, 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 boom. Right, al-Kamil, la, it's longer. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي رزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل. And like that, you just finished the first line. Right? So you see that this one is much longer than أبدأ بالحمد مصليا على محمد خير نبي أرسل. Right? You can get a little bit further and faster with it. This one, not so much. So you're going to have to slow down in your reciting of it. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي رزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل اسمع كلام محقق في قوله لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل حب الصحابة كلهم لي مذهب ومحبة القربى بها أتوسل ولكلهم قدر على وفضائل لكنما الصديق منهم أفضل وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزل وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول وأرد أهدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما يتخيل قبحا لمن I did? نعم أحسن الله عليكم وجميع آيات الصفات أرد وجميع آيات الصفات أمرها حقا كما نقل الطراز الأول وأرد عهدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما يتخيل قبحا لمن نبذ الكتاب وراءه This one says Quran. Well, notice, and we'll talk about it, maybe not. There are different ways of it. Like I said, قدر على وفضائل, that's not the way I know it. وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ وَفَضْلٌ سَاطِعٌ. Likewise, the debate, وَأَقُولُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ مَا جَاءَتْ بِهِ آيَاتُهُ, it's not in some of them, right? But this one is 16 lines, so we'll say this. قُبْحًا لِمَنْ نَبَذَ الْقُرْآنِ. That just doesn't fit right.
Doesn't sound right.
It just doesn't fit right. So, this is what they call Nazm al-Fuqaha, right? Poetry, there's, and I'm not proficient in it, but there's like a specific, like words in poetry have a specific scale and like a mathematical system of how you do it. It's really complex, right? But scholars don't follow that, right? They call it Nazm al-Fuqaha. If you're a poet, a linguist, no, you got to be perfect. Your word, like, you can't even use the same word twice in debate, otherwise your poem is rejected, and like there's a whole science to it. But the scholars, when they write a poem in Islam, they call it Nazm al-Fuqaha. Well, we don't follow half of those rules, right? We just need it to be catchy, right? So you can memorize it. قُبْحًا لِمَنْ نَبَذَ الْقُرْآنَ وَرَاءَهُ. I just don't like it as much. قُبْحًا لِمَنْ نَبَذَ الْكِتَابَ وَرَاءَهُ وَإِذَا اسْتَدَلَّ يَقُولُ قَالَ الْأَخْطَلُ والمؤمنون يرون حقا ربهم وإلى السماء بغير كيف ينزل وأقر بالميزان والحوض الذي أرجو بأني منه ريا أنهل وكذا الصراط وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم فموحد باق وآخر مهمل والنار يصلاها الشقي بحكمة وكذا التقي إلى الجنان سيدخل ولكل حي عاقل في قبره عمل تقارنه هناك ويسأل هذا اعتقاد الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل وأحمد
ممنوع من الصرف.
ممنوع من الصرف لكن so ثم معطوف على so he got a مجرور ممنوع من الصرف معطوف على I did it استئناف. Okay. هذا اعتقاد الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل فإن اتبعت اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك معول. اقرأ.
I gotta read it.
Everybody got to read it.
I can't do it like that.
You don't got to read it like that, huh?
It says for Muslim Najin, and you should something else. After وكذا الصراط
Oh, I didn't read that?
you read something else.
What I say? Oh no, so hold on. وأقر no, not there. وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم فموحد ناج وآخر مهمل. فمسلم ناج. لا موحد أفضل. I like موحد أفضل. Yeah, موحد أفضل. فمسلم ناج, it's the same thing. لا. فموحد ناج. All right? Because Allah says in the Quran, وإن منكم إلا واردها كان على ربك حتما مقديا ثم ننجي الذين اتقوا ونذر الظالمين فيها جثيا. فموحد ناج, right? وآخر مهمل. طيب.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي يرزق الهدى يرزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل. اسمع كلام محقق في قوله لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل.
Now, one thing I will say, and the reason why I want everybody to read it, because you got to get out of that shell. That shell of I don't want to read, and I definitely don't want to read it with a nice voice and poetry and all that. The whole point of poetry is that it don't work if you don't do it, right?
Don't do it.
So you got to be فَمُوَحِّدٌ نَاجٍ, right? You got to hit it. Otherwise, what's the point? You can just memorize a regular book. Tafadhal.
Is it the best way of the rhythm is the camel?
No, I like rajs. For me, it's the best scale, but that's because it's the closest to English rap.
The rajs?
Yeah.
What you did wasn't rajs?
No, that's camel. The only way you can, this poem is written on the bahr of camel. Right? You have different scales, right?
So we have to stick to this scale.
This poem is on the scale. There's nothing else you can do.
Because I heard different ways. I don't know.
يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي. What other ways? I mean, the scale is the inflection, right? You can't. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي يرزق الهدى من لله. The inflection of where you, like that boom, 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 boom. Like Khalil, when he recognized the scale of the Arab poetry, that's exactly what it was. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي. Boom, 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 boom. And that's how he came up with the scales that he came up with. I'm trying to think of one second. Give me a second.
You know the. Go ahead.
حكم المحبة. See, now I got this in my head. I'm gonna. حكم المحبة ثابت الأركان ما للصدود بفسخ ذاك يداني أن وقاضي الحسن See, I can't. I got this in my head. I can't even do that right now, right? Because I just want to do everything Lamiyah, right? What's the other one? يقول راجي ربه المقتدر عبد الرحيم ابن الحسين الأثري من بعد حمد الله ذي الآلاء. You see how that one hits real quicker, right? That's rajs. Rajs is like boom, 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 right? But this is camel, so you gotta.
How many scales are there?
I think it's 7, if I'm not mistaken. But even in those 7, there's alterations and variations.
So you can mix it up.
No, you can't mix it up, but they are mixed up. So you can't put rajs into camel, but there are things that you can drop off. Like there's things in poetry that allows you to flip up the words, pronounce them incorrectly, add letters like Jahannama. What's that aleph there? That's a poetry thing, right? It's called aleph al-itlaq. You put it at the end of the poem to make the line correct because it has to be on a scale, right? And there's a science. One day we can go through it. I love the science. I need to go through it with a teacher because I haven't gone through it with a teacher. But it's a lovely science. It's like math. If you like math, you got to break the words down to X circle, circle, X circle, or line circles, right? Anyway, اقرأ.
يحب الصحابة كلهم لهي مذهب مودة القربى بها تتوسل
Take a second.
وكلهم قدر على وفضائل لكنما الصديق منهم أفضل وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزل وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول وجميع آيات الصفات أمرها حقا كما نقل الطراز الأول وأرد أهدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما يتخيل قبحا لمن نذب القرآن وراءه وإذا استدل يقول قال الأخطل والمؤمنون يرون حقا ربهم وإلى السماء بغير كيف ينزل وأقر بالميزان والحوض الذي أرجو بأني منه ريان أنهل وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم
The one I know is فوق جهنم. But here they got فوق جهنم, which I don't like. No, it's always a مضاف إليه, but it's the وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم. No, that's that extra beat too long. And if you say فوق جهنم, it's an extra beat too short. وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم فموحد ناج وآخر محمل.
But it rhymes with الذي.
No, it doesn't.
جهنم الذي.
You went Jahannam الذي. You think that rhymes? Just because you shook your head.
It has, like you see the first line. Oh no, don't.
The first line. So in poetry, what has to rhyme is the they call it the qafi, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember all these terms now. But the end of it, right? That's why it's one line. The lamb is what it is. Everything else before that, all it has to be is on the scale. Haraka, sukun, haraka, sukun. If you look at it, you'll find that the harakas and the sukuns match up. Ya, is. You see what I'm saying?
Which one?
The first line, ya, is. It's a haraka and a sukun, right? Sa, ma. You see the haraka and the sukuns are matching?
You did?
Li,
You did not?
ili, kala. You see the harakas and the sukuns are matching, right? You with me?
Yeah, I'm with
Right? You got an, kalam, here it's off. Ma and an, so they did some alteration there. Because it should be am and then muhaqqiq, right? It's off. It gets off because of they can do alterations. But in poetry, what matches in every line, the important part of the scale is based on harakat and sukuns. That's how you tell the scale it's on, because of harakat and sukun. Go ahead. وكذا الصراط
وكذا الصراط
يمد
يمد فوق جهنم
فمسلم
ناج وآخر مهمل والنار يسلاها الشقي بحكمة، وكذا التقي إلى الجنان
Slow down.
سيدخل. ولكل حي عاقل في قبره عمل يقارنه وهناك ويسأل. هذا اعتقاد الشافعي والمالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل. فإن اتبعت فسبيلهم
فموفق.
وإن ابتدعت فما عليك معول.
Fadl. You said you memorize it? If you memorize it, do it from memory.
Did you memorize it?
Okay. اقرأ.
سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي والهدى من للهداية يسأل. اسمع كلام محقق في قوله لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل. حب الصحابة كلهم لي مذهب ومودة القربى بها أتوسل. ولكلهم قدر على وفضائل لكنما الصديق منهم أفضل. وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزل. وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول. وجميع آيات الصفات أمرها حقا كما نقل الطراز الأول. وأرد عهدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما يتخيل. قبحا لمن نبذ القرآن وراءه فإذا استدل يقول قال الأخطل. والمؤمنون يرون حقا ربهم وإلى السماء بغير كيف ينزل. وأقر بالميزان والحوض الذي أرجو بأني منه ريا أنهل. وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم مسلم ناج وآخر مهمل. والنار يصلاها الشقي بحكمة وكذا التقي إلى الجنان سيدخل. ولكل حي عاقل في قبره عمل يقارنه هناك ويسأل.
Now, there's no tajweed in poetry. That's the thing that's important because the scale, you can't hide the letters. Amalun yuqarinu, right? There's no amalun, right? There's no tajweed in poetry.
عمل يقارنه هناك ويسأل. هذا اعتقاد الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل. فإن اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك معول.
Now, and you're going to see when we do the explanation that some of these words, like, is it naqaliha, nuqaliha, yanqulu, yunqalu, right? Because it changes the meaning. But both meanings will be correct. Fadl. Huda, they got the dhamma on top of the lam, it should be on top of the ha. Ruziqal huda. يتبدل.
القربى بها أتوسل ولكلهم قدر على وفد ضاعل لكنما الصديق منهم أفضل وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو القريب المنزل وأقول قال الله جل جلاله ومصطفى هادي ولا أتى أول وجميع آيات الصفات أمرها حقا كما قالت طراز الأول وأرد وحدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما
يتخيل
قبحا لمن نبت القرآن وراءه وإذا استدل
يقول قال الأخطل
والمؤمنون يرون حقا ربهم وإلى السماع بخير كيف ينزل وأخر بالميزان والحوض بالذي أرجو بأن
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
أني منه ريا أنحل وكذا السراد يمد فوق جهنم ومسلم
ناج
وخوف مكمل والنار يصلاها لاح الشقي
بحكمة
وكاد التقي إلى الجنان سيدخل ولكل هي آخل في قبره أمل يقارنوه هناك ويسأل كدعب قاد الشافعية ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل فإن اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك مؤول.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي رزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل. اسمع كلام محقق في قوله لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل. حكم الصحابة كلهم لي مذهب ومودة القربى بها أتوسل. ولكلهم قدر على وفضائل لكنما الصديق منهم أفضل. وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزل. وأقول
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا وصلة وفضل والبعث المقام المحمود الذي وعد رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول وجميع آيات الصفات أمرها حقا كما نقل الطراز الأول وأرد عهدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما يتخيل قبحا لمن نبذ الكتاب وراءه وإذا استدل يقول قال الأفضل والمؤمنون يرون حقا ربهم وإلى السماء بغير كيف ينزل وأقر بالميزان والحوض الذي أرجو بأني منه ريا أنهل وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم فموحد ناج وآخر مهمل والنار يصلاها الشقي بحكمة وكذا التقي إلى الجنان سيدخل ولكل حي عاقل في قبره عمل يقارنه هناك ويسأل هذا اعتقاد الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل فإن اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك معول.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي أرزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل اسمع كلام محقق في قوله لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل حب الصحابة كلهم لي مذهب ومودة القربى بها أتوسل ولكلهم قدر على وفضائل لكنما الصديق منهم أفضل وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزل وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول وجميع آيات الصفات أمرها حقا كما نقل الطراز الأول وأرد عهدتها إلى نقالها وأصونها عن كل ما يتخيل قبحا لمن نبذ القرآن وراءه وإذا استدل يقول قال الأفضل والمؤمنون يرون حقا ربهم وإلى السماء بغير كيف ينزل وأقر بالميزان والحوض الذي أرجو بأني منه ريا أنهل وكذا الصراط يمد فوق جهنم فمسلم ناج وآخر مهمل والنار يصلاها الشقي بحكمة وكذا التقي إلى الجنان سيدخل ولكل حي عاقل في قبره عمل يقارنه هناك ويسأل هذا اعتقاد الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل فإن اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك معول.
No. I thought you were going to ask me, should I go, وَكَذَا الصِّرَاطُ مَدُّ فَوْقَ جَهَنَّمَ.
Yeah, it has like like you want to use the tajweed, like
Yeah.
حَقَّ رَبَّهُ.
No. The reason why you can't use the tajweed because the bahr, the scale in poetry, is all about the letter and the sound it makes, the harakah. So when you write poetry, like it might look like this, but the way you say it, they have a special way of writing it that you only write what you say, right? So like for example, one now, you would write wow, noon, noon. Because the aleph and lam, you don't say it. So when you're writing it on the scale of poetry, you would write wow, noon, feta. Wow, noon, sukoon, noon, feta, aleph, sukoon, ra, dhamma, right? And then you would write your lines to figure it out, and then you would convert it to the scale mufa'alan, 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 mufa'alan. And like that, it shows you like how the inflection should be, how the poem should be. Anyway, very quickly, the translation, because this poem, wallahi, I love this poem. And its simplicity, it's one of the best poems written in Aqidah, especially because of how it deals with the minhaj of Aqidah. Ya sa'ili an madhhabi wa aqidati. O you, or O one who is questioning me or asking me about my madhhab and my aqidah. So we see here that there's a difference between the madhhab and the aqidah. The madhhab being the way I get to my aqidah, and the aqidah being my belief. You're asking me about my minhaj and my aqidah. Ya sa'ili an madhhabi wa aqidati, ruziq al-huda man lil-hidayati yas'alu. May he be granted guidance, or may he be provided guidance, the one who is asking about guidance. May you get what you ask for, right? وَلِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. Everybody gets what they're asking for. And this is a good etiquette from the author. اسمع كلام محقق في قوله. Listen to the statement of a muhaqqiq. And this is an important quality. One who knows the truth and can confirm it. And that is different than the one who is blindly following. That is different than the one who has just heard something and repeats what he heard. Bel hada kalam muhaqqiq. This is a statement of one who knows the truth and can verify it. I have my evidences. I have my proof for this. So listen to the statement of a muhaqqiq in his statement. My statement that I'm saying, I'm sure about. And because I'm sure about it, لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل. He won't move away from it, nor will he replace it. Al-inthina is to bend, to deviate. لا ينثني عنه ولا يتبدل. And he's not going to exchange it with other than that. What's the foundation of our minhaj? What's the foundation of our aqidah? What's the first step on this ladder of our aqidah? حب الصحابة كلهم لي مذهب ومودة القربى بها أتوسل. Loving the Sahaba, all of them, is my madhab. My minhaj and how I approach the religion is what? Qala Allah, Qala Rasul, upon what? Fahm as-salaf. Hubb as-sahaba. You gotta love the Sahaba, and loving them means following them. Loving the Sahaba, all of them, is my madhab. That's my minhaj. That's how I get my answers. And as well as wa mawaddatul qurba, as well as loving the close family, i.e. of the Prophet, is a way of me drawing closer to Allah. I worship Allah through loving the Prophet's family. وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ عَلَى وَفَضَائِلُ. And for all of them is a value that has reached high levels. قَدْرٌ عَلَى. They have a level that has ascended, has risen above. Right? And in some of the versions, وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ وَلِكُلِّهِمْ subhanallah, I can't remember it. وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ no, وَفَضَائِلُ سَاطِعٌ. Right? وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ no, وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ subhanallah, I can't remember it now. وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ وَفَضْلٌ وَاسِعٌ. ساطع. You can say it either way. وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ وَفَضْلٌ سَاطِعُ. Right? And each of them has a value and a nobility or a preference about them that is prestigious. لَكِنَّمَا الصِّدِّيقُ مِنْهُمْ أَفْضَلُ. But the Siddiq is the best one. And this is an inference to our methodology in the Sahaba. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, al-Ashar al-Mubashirin, ila akhirih. وَلِكُلِّهِمْ فَضْلٌ عَلَى وَلِكُلِّهِمْ قَدْرٌ عَلَى وَفَضَائِلُ لَكِنَّمَا الصِّدِّيقُ مِنْهُمْ أَفْضَلُ. طيب, now that I know my minhaj, as it relates to everything I believe, is based on whose understanding? Sahaba. طيب, what's my first source? وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزل. My first source is the Quran. So I say about the Quran whatever its ayat say. Whatever's in the Quran is what I say. You want to know my aqidah? My aqidah is what's in the Quran. ما جاءت به آياته. Why do I believe everything that's in the Quran? فهو الكريم. It's the noble Quran. It's giving off these great honorable meanings that has been sent down. It has not been created. It's the speech of Allah sent down, not created. From Him it began, to Him it will return. وَأَقُولُ قَالَ اللَّهُ جَلَّ جَلَالُهُ. طيب, and my statement is, Allah said, Jalla Jalaluhu. May His loftiness be exemplified or manifest. May His nobility be apparent for all. طيب, what's my second source? وَالْمُصْطَفَى الْهَادِي وَلَا أَتَأَوَّلُ. As well as the Mustafa, the Prophet Muhammad, who guides us, and I do not interpret it. I do not interpret it in spite of the clarity in its meanings from Allah and His Messenger. Right? Because interpretation can be good interpretation when there's evidence, and it can be bad interpretation. So if Allah said it, I said it. The Messenger said it, I say it. According to the way Sahaba understood it, because I love them, and I do not interpret it. Play, what is the bad interpretation? The bad interpretation is the opposite of what I'm about to say. وَجَمِيعُ آيَاتِ الصِّفَاتِ أُمِرُّهَا حَقًّا كَمَا نَقَلَ الطِّرَازُ الْأَوَّلُ. And all of the ayat that deal with the sifat, if we're going to talk about Aqidah, what's the most important part of Aqidah? If we're talking about Aqidah, what's the most important part of Aqidah? Allah. And what's the most important part of Aqidah as it relates to Allah? Asma wa Sifat. Right? The most important conversation about Allah is Tawheed. And the most important Tawheed is Tawheed al-Ibadah. But when we're talking about Aqidah, as the Muslim, the most important Aqidah of the Muslim is the Aqidah of Asma wa Sifat. That was the first bid'ah. This is the first conversation we're going to have about Aqidah. وَجَمِيعُ آيَاتِ الصِّفَاتِ أُمِرُّهَا. Every ayat of sifat, I let it go on the way it came. مَا جَاءَتْ بِهِ وَأُمِرُّهَا حَقًّا كَمَا نَقَلَ الطِّرَازُ الْأَوَّلُ. The same way the first generation narrated it. الطِّرَاز الْجَمَاعَةِ or النَّوْعَ. The first group. Who was the first group? As-Sahaba. He says, وَأَرُدُّ أُهْدَتُهَا إِلَى نُقَّالِهَا. I love this line. And I refer the responsibility or the meaning of it or the understanding of it إِلَى نُقَّالِهَا, to those who transmitted it. And he uses the word nuqal. Some of the versions says naqiliha, the transmitter. But the better word is nuqal. Why? Because it shows an abundance of them saying those things. And this shows us the tawatur of the meanings of Allah's names and qualities. Then that all of the Sahaba were in agreement about it. All of them did what? All of the Sahaba did what? They said Allah's names and His attributes. Did any of them ever interpret it?
No.
فَأَرُدُّ أُهْدَتُهَا إِلَى نُقَّالِهَا. I take all of its meaning back to those who transmitted it. They said it, I say it. What did it mean? What they meant when they said it. Like Shafi'i said, I believe on the statements of Allah the way Allah meant them. And I believe in the statements of the Messenger of Allah the way the Messenger meant them. وَأَرُدُّ عُهْدَتُهَا إِلَى نُقَّالِهَا. And not only do I transmit them, I don't do that interpretation, so what do? وَأَصُونُهَا عَنْ كُلِّ مَا يُتَخَيَّلُ. and I protect it from everything that is falsely imagined. Like we talked about, the innovator compares before he negates. But me, I don't do this interpretation. So I say it, I affirm, and then I negate. Right? The innovator compares and then negates. Me, I affirm and then I negate. So the innovator compares and then negates the reality. Me, I affirm the reality and then negate the comparison. طيب. Who is my opponent in all of this? Who am I different than in this aqidah? قُبْحًا لِمَنْ نَبَذَ الْكِتَابَ وَرَاءَهُ. Disgusting. How repulsive is the one who throws the book behind his back. And when he tries to prove something, وَإِذَا اسْتَدَلَّ يَقُولُ قَالَ الْأَخْطَلُ. When he tries to prove something, he says, Akhtal said. Akhtal was a Muslim philosopher who we'll talk about in the explanation. So we see the difference. أنا محقق لا أنثني ولا أتبدل. Right? حب الصحابة قال الله قال الرسول أمرها حقا كما نقل الطراز الأول وأصونها. But this individual, he's a blind follower. When he wants to use a proof, he says قال الأخطل. طيب, now that we understand the minhaj, all of that was in my minhaj in Aqidah. How do I get to my Aqidah? طيب, what are some of the things I believe? We talked about, when Sheikh Abdul Razak was here, from the biggest things that they argue about is the loftiness of Allah, the speech of Allah, and seeing Allah. And so he uses this aspect because of its inclusion of the other aspects. وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ يَرَوْنَ حَقًّا رَبَّهُمْ. And the believers will see for sure their Lord. وَإِلَى السَّمَاءِ بِغَيْرِ كَيْفٍ يَنْزِلُ. And to the closest sky, without trying to give it a how, he descends. Why does he mention this quality? Because this is a quality that only the Sunnah confirms. You cannot find this in the Quran. And so this is a big point in Aqidah, the nuzul of Allah, because you cannot find it in the Quran, only the Sunnah confirms it. But it's part of our Aqidah. So we got the fact that Allah can be seen, and that includes the fact that Allah is above, right? And likewise, you have the fact that Allah comes down. What else does he agree with? وَأُقِرُّ بِالْمِيزَانِ وَالْحَوْضِ الَّذِي أَرْجُو بِأَنِّيَ مِنْهُ رِيًّا أَوْ رَيًّا أَنْهَلُ. And these choices that he's making and what he's talking about in Aqidah are daqiq. They're very particular. He's establishing, and I established the scale. Right? The scale where the actions, the believers, or the statements are going to be weighed. And likewise, the hawd. And from the greatest qualities or the greatest things that is mentioned about the hawd is who gets to drink from it? It's a particular type of person. It's a particular type of person that gets to drink from the hawd. Sahibu Sunnah. Sahibu Sunnah. The person who does bid'ah, what's going to be said to him when he comes to the hawd? He's going to be said, Ashabi, Ashabi. And the Prophet is going to say, they're going to say to the Prophet, you don't know what they innovated after you. So he's going to say, Suhqan suhqa.
Is that also for the followers of the...
Who's he talking to? He's saying, Ashabi, Ashabi. The Muslims.
No, the people who follow, like the innovator.
Are you from the innovators?
No, I'm saying like...
Not you. The person who follows the innovators. Is he from the innovators?
Like,
Yes.
Is he from the innovators? You answer that question, I'll answer your question. If you say he's from the innovators, suhqan suhqa. If you say he's not from the innovators, I say I hope. Right? Because not everybody who does an innovation is a innovator. But that's a decision that I don't even want to be close to having to make for myself. Right? Sahibul Sunnah is the one who gets to drink from the hawd, and that's why he mentions it. وَأُقِرُّ بِالْمِيزَانِ وَالْحَوْضِ الَّذِي أَرْجُو بِأَنِّيَ مِنْهُ رَيًّا أَنْهَلُ. I hope that I'm going to get to be from the people who get my thirst quenched from it. We'll finish the translation, inshallah. وَكَذَا الصِّرَاطِ. Another purposeful point. Likewise, the bridge is going to be stretched across Jahannam. Right? Everybody's going into the hellfire or above the hellfire. And who are the people that escape? فَمُوَحِّدٌ نَاجٍ. The only people that are going to escape are the people of Tawheed. فَمُوَحِّدٌ نَاجٍ. And everybody else, وَآخَرُ مُهْمَلُ, is disregarded therein. Nobody cares about them. Nobody has any concern for them. لا يكلمهم الله يوم القيامة ولا ينظر إليهم ولا يزكيهم ولهم عذاب أليم. طيب. And what is the end result after the bridge? وَالنَّارُ يَصْلَاهَا الشَّقِيُّ بِحِكْمَةٍ. And the fire, they will burn in it those wretched individuals because of wisdom. وَالنَّارُ يَصْلَاهَا الشَّقِيُّ. That wretched individual that Allah has already ordained that he is shaqi. When he was in the womb of his mother, why will he burn therein? Because of Allah's hikmah. And what is Allah's hikmah? What does hikmah mean? To put things where they belong. So the iyadhu billahi min an-nar. Allahumma ajirna min an-nar. The kafir belongs in the hellfire. That's Allah's hikmah. Allah puts him where he belongs. He belongs in the hellfire. فَمُوَحِّدٌ نَاجٍ وَآخَرُ مُهْمَلٌ وَالنَّارُ يَصْلَاهَا الشَّقِيُّ بِحِكْمَةٍ. I like the way they read it on the one point, وَكَذَتَّقِي. Right? They break it up right there just to give an extra minute. And likewise, the righteous person will be in the hellfire for what? For wisdom. But you can break it up there. They break it up there to try to remind you of that point. But then they say the line the way it should be said. وَكَذَتَّقِيُّ إِلَى الْجِنَانِ سَيَدْخُلُ. And on the opposite, the person who has piety will enter into the paradise. Tell you, the person who has piety, does it ensure that he won't enter the hellfire? وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. And there's not one of you who's not going into it. كَانَ عَلَى رَبِّكَ حَتْمًا مَقْضِيًّا. That is a guaranteed fact from your Lord. ثُمَّ نُنَجِّ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا. And then we'll save those that have taqwa. And we'll leave the وَنَظُرُ الظَّالِمِينَ فِيهَا جِثِيًّا. And we'll leave the the oppressors therein sitting on their knees. طيب. And who is going to be treated this way? وَلِكُلِّ حَيٍّ عَاقِلٍ. For everybody who was alive. Life to show that you have action. Because the أخص صفات الحياة العمل. The most exclusive quality of something that is alive is that it acts. This book, is it alive? How do you know? It's not acting. Also in it is a reference to the fact that not the sleep. Because sleep is what? Al-Mawt al-Sughra. It's the baby death. So when you're asleep, do your actions count? No. And who else's actions don't count even though they're alive? Aqil. The opposite of the aqil is the majnoon. So for every person who is alive, i.e. they're awake and they have actions and they're not majnoon, they're aqil, amalun. He's going to have his actions do what? Yuqarinuhu hunaka wa fi qabrihi. In his grave, he's going, one second, Sheikh, we'll pray 1 second. He's going to have his actions in his grave being his companion. And he's going to be asked about them. As far as the sleep, as far as the insane, right? They won't be asked about their actions. This is the aqidah. هذا اعتقاد شافعي ومالك and Abu Hanifa ثم أحمد ينقل or ينقل. Here, this is the aqidah of Shafi'i and Malik and Abi Hanifa. And we're going to have a conversation about this when we talk about al-aqidatu nazila wal-aqidatu nabita. The aqidah that comes down and the aqidah that grows up. And the difference between the two. And our aqidah is the one that comes down. So our affiliation to these people is an affiliation of spreading the aqidah, not of making the aqidah. As far as the aqidah that grows up, then it's the aqidah that the one who introduced it made it. He made it come into pass. And so the aqidah of Ash'ari, the aqidah of Ibn Kullab, he's the one who raised this aqidah. As far as our aqidah, it came down. And that's why it doesn't change. That's why it doesn't alter. But as far as theirs, no, it goes through additions and adjustments. So this is the aqidah of Shafi'i and Malik and Abi Hanifa. And then Ahmed, yunqalu, i.e. all of it is being transmitted. But I like to say, thumma Ahmedu yanqulu. And then Ahmed did what? He just transmitted it. Because a lot of people like to make Imam Ahmed separate from Abu Hanifa, Malik, and Shafi'i. But did Imam Ahmed have a new Aqidah? What did he do? He just transmitted the Aqidah of Shafi'i, Malik, and Abi Hanifa. Right? So that's why I say yanqulu. And then what's the final result? Wallahi, this poem is amazing in its shortness. فَإِنِ اتَّبَعْتَ سَبِيلَهُم. So if you follow their path, فَمُوَفَّقٌ. Then you are successful. وَإِنِ ابْتَدَعْتَ. And if you innovated, then there's no reliance upon you. We not counting you. We don't count you. We don't rely upon you. So the statement of the innovator, does it contradict the consensus? All of the Sahaba agreed. The innovator disagrees. Does their disagreement affect the unanimous agreement of the Sahaba? Why not? Ma alayka al-mu'awwal. Nobody's counting you. You don't exist. Your life is like your death. You don't count. You don't matter. You are a nobody. You are a nothing. Right? Inshallah, we'll read it next time. Inshallah, we'll start reading it next time.